Hi, everybody. I am Trisha Ambo, and I'm with the Disability Rights of Arkansas. I currently sit on their board. And today we're going to be talking a lot about education, something that's very close to my heart. And we are blessed to have a great panel with us to discuss early education all the way through high school. And so we're going to start with Jessica Saum. She is going to discuss how to ensure educational success and supporting educational needs through the eyes of your child's teacher, and how to create a plan to ensure meaningful inclusion and healthy relationships with your child's team. So a little background on Jessica. She is currently working in the Cabot Public Schools. She is she's with the Association of American Educators, and she is a Arkansas State Teachers Association Advocacy Fellow. She is a native of Columbia, South Carolina, but she calls Sherwood, Arkansas home. She graduated in 2011 with a Bachelor's of Science in Education in Early Childhood and Special Education from Arkansas State University. In 2016, she received her Master's of Science in Education in 412 Special Education from ASU. And she also, let's see what else. Goodness, so much. And she also completed the Arkansas State University Special Education Director Graduate Certificate Program in Education Leadership. She is a self-contained special ed teacher at Stagecoach University in Cabot, which is where my daughter goes. So I'm fortunate. And she is married to a wonderful man named Shane. She has two children, and Tucker and Magnolia, who are beautiful children, wonderful children. In her spare time, because she has so much of it, it sounds like, she plays roller derby for the Rocktown Roller Derbies in Little Rock. When I found that out, I knew that she could handle my child. She is passionate about providing students with meaningful inclusion opportunities in special ed and supporting military families. Welcome. Wow, you're like Superwoman.
Yeah.
And we are blessed to have you. So let's get started. Are you ready?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's talk about meaningful inclusion, building relationship with your child's team. This is all so very important.
Yes.
And we want to make sure that our kids start off on the right foot and that they are successful. So once a student qualifies for special services, let's talk about placement and what parents should consider when they're looking at these options.
Absolutely. So after a child has qualified, and those examinations will be done through therapists, they can be done at the school at no cost to the parents, or sometimes accepted from outside therapies, and a disability is identified, and that disability hinders a child's education where they cannot learn in a gen ed classroom with just accommodations or supports. Then they're placed in a special education setting. There's a lot that needs to be considered with that. The big thing is the least restrictive environment. We always want the general education setting to be that ground point where we go. So let's start there and see what we can do to support the child in that setting. If their needs can't be met with those accommodations or other supports, then we have to talk in the other settings. It always still should be the least restrictive environment, and that's going to look different for every kiddo. They're not all going to have the same needs that can be served in the same environment. So when we think of those different settings, we think of resource, a special class or self-contained, or CBI, which is community-based instruction. Those are kind of the three big settings we see, especially in that early childhood education level, K-6 really. Once their placement's been decided, that's reviewed every year. We meet at those IEP meetings to make that plan every single year. And then you always want a student to be as close to possible to their home school. So if their placement can be at their home school, that's ideal. And if not, then the closest school possible to them. so that they're still a part of their community and a part of home. We want it to be as much as, a typical situation for them as possible in the community that they live in. So resource is one setting in the elementary level. That typically has an 8-to-1 student ratio. A big thing with resource that we really want to remember is that resource is not a curriculum for students. Resource is not a separate curriculum from the general education setting. Resource should be reinforcement from the general education teachers. So that student is spending somewhere between 40 to 79% of their day in the gen ed setting and getting pulled out for reading, writing, or math. They're getting help specifically in the area where they may have a deficit. And it may only be one of those areas. They can get services between 15 minutes per area to 60 minutes per area. I think writing typically is about 30 minutes is the most that they would get, but reading and math, they can get up to 60 minutes. And then occasionally you have students getting even behavior supports in that resource setting. The behavior can be addressed through resource services. It does not have to be a special class or a CBI setting. Those goals should support that general education curriculum. And then, teachers really have to be working together. That general education teacher, that resource teacher need to be collaborating and communicating to make sure progress is shared, that common goals are shared, and even lesson plans can be shared. You could send me a lesson plan that I could easily adapt to meet that student's needs in a smaller setting and support them as they head back into the gen ed setting with their peers. So that's the big, I'd say a lot of students, the majority of students with learning disabilities, with special needs are served the bulk of their day in a gen ed setting. So they might just need a little bit of pull out and support that can be met easily through resource. I teach special class that also is sometimes referred to as self-contained in different settings. And the student to teacher ratio in that special class setting is 1 to 15. I'm very fortunate to have great paraprofessionals that work with me. I don't know that I could do my job without them. They are, you know how important they are. The relationships they form, those individualized supports they can provide, and really how they can make the general education setting so much more accessible to students.
They certainly make your job easier. They really do. I know that. I mean, I just, it couldn't be successful without. They're just so important to have those good paras in that room and that support. And they're such an extension of the teachers.
They really are. Last week, I think April 1st was Paraprofessional Day. And we really wanted to celebrate them for all that they do, because they're the ones doing so many of the lunch, the recess duty. They're going into activities, and the relationships that they form with the students and then that they form with those other teachers are just such a critical aspect of my students' day. They need strong support. They need advocates. And oftentimes that paraprofessional is their advocate in that setting. It could be anything from accessing the learning materials, the curriculum, to just, they need someone to support them in a moment of frustration or anxiety or fear, to help them calm down and be able to regroup and then continue on with the learning with their peers. So that's I think just between the CBI and special class setting, the paraprofessionals really, they make our classes work. They're just so important. We do have, 1 to 15. So of course we do have a lower student to teacher ratio, but again, we have paraprofessional support. And then students in the special class setting are not in the special class setting all day. They are provided with multiple opportunities to be with their typically developing peers, to really get that exposure to, these are the expectations, not just in my classroom, but everywhere. So they'll spend part of their day in the classroom with their peers, maybe doing reading, phonics, science, social studies. It really depends on the grade level and finding where those inclusion opportunities are best going to support them. And if there's a student that really has an interest in a certain subject or specific area, then that's the time they need to push in so they can have success, and those opportunities for learning extensions are meaningful and authentic. They also will go to activity classes, and then any special parties or extra events they're always included in those. And that's a really big thing at our school, is just making sure that our students are included in every opportunity that's been provided to their grade level peers, that it's not just in my classroom or the CBI classrooms. The CBI,
what's typically the ratio in the CBI? Have we discussed the CBI classroom? We haven't.
No, that was what I was going to talk about.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's okay. And it's interesting you asked about ratio. I meant to mention with resource. So in my classroom, it's 1 to 15 is the ratio, the standard ratio. Resource is 1 to 8, and of course they're pulled in small groups, different times of the day. But students can count as more than one student. So if a student had a specific learning disability in reading, but also maybe had a vision impairment, they would count for numbers as 2 students. So that's just something to kind of be aware of. If a student has more significant needs, but they could still be addressed in the resource setting, sometimes they count as more than one student when working within those ratios. So CBI, or community-based instruction, that's a 1 to 10 student ratio, and that classroom will also have paraprofessional support. Some school districts will have maybe a medically fragile class. You really don't see that as much anymore as we're moving towards, more inclusion and a less restrictive environment overall for schools. But other districts, smaller school districts especially, won't really have a separation between a CBI and a special class setting, because the percentage of the day is 79% or more of the day is spent out of the general education setting. It kind of can be used interchangeably. Your larger districts will try to separate out more, with focusing on academic skills versus academic and functional skills, which you see more of in that community-based instruction class. In both settings, though, students have varying abilities and disabilities. They're not all going to be the same, and we know that. Their needs are going to be different, and their goals and their academic and social goals are going to be addressed through their IEPs. So a lot of times learning is one-on-one or two-on-one, because we have to meet each kiddo's individual needs and goals each day to work on. They will get academic skills, but also some of those daily living and functional skills that really need to be addressed. Sometimes they're addressed at home, but we're really working to reinforce them in school. Where students are spending a lot of their day at school, and so that's really where they're getting a lot of that meaningful instruction. And things just are different in school and social settings than they are at home. The things that happen at home, they're different, so we need to transfer them to multiple settings. But all students, they still need many opportunities to be integrated into that general education setting, just to get those really good opportunities and to form those relationships with other peers.
Yeah, we learned that a lot with my daughter, Emma. She really excelled in reading, but she really wasn't a big fan of math. So she was able to have a great experience in gen ed in her reading, but she really needed to focus one-on-one on her math, and that's okay, because we wanted to make sure that she's definitely educated, and right. And that's what worked best for her. But they're individuals, like you said, they are all individuals.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting. I had the opportunity, a friend of mine is a teacher at Collegeville Elementary School, and April's Autism Awareness Month, and she had me Zoom in with her classroom and talk to them about autism, and talk to them about being a teacher, what they could do to help support students in my class. And they asked so many great questions, but it really was a great chance for them to know that any student is going to have different needs. They're not going to meet, there's not going to be one answer for them of how to meet these friends, or how to connect with these friends, or even how to support and be an ally for these classmates and friends of theirs. And it was a really neat opportunity to share with them. And sometimes we forget every child is different, no matter typical or not. They're all going to be different, and they're all going to have different needs. But being able to provide those services in the special class or CBI setting, we can really hone in and support them in exactly what they need. I think that's one of the things I love about teaching in this setting, is I don't have a box of standards that we have to meet every single day. I have a student I look at, and I determine what they need in order to be successful academically, socially, behaviorally, and that's one of the best things about teaching my class, is really getting students where they're at and deciding where we really need them to go to be successful.
It's one thing that I have learned over the years is, and one thing that I share with a lot of my parents when they're starting this journey of education is, we don't always have to get wrapped up in, the name that's over the door.
Yeah.
Walk through those doors and meet those teachers and meet the paras and see who's actually educating your children. Because I mean, even with our typical children, sometimes they're just not good fits,
Right.
and sometimes they're great fits. So,
Absolutely.
like you said, it's, a little bit of time here and a little bit of time here and a little bit of time here. That all works.
It does.
That works.
And I think we have to remember that, especially a student maybe who's just placing, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. You're hearing these terms, you're hearing these settings. My daughter gets speech therapy, and she qualified at 3 years old. And I remember sitting down, and I knew she had delays. I was very, very aware of what was going on, and then looking at me and saying, "Well, she has severe delays in this area and this area," and hearing that word severe, it's shocking, and it's scarier to think your child's going to a special class or just to community-based instruction. That's overwhelming. But number one, that's their starting point. That's where we're at today, and that's where we're going to meet these needs today. But this is one chapter in a very long book. And I sat in on a meeting with a parent a few weeks ago, and they were concerned about, the placement and how much time is being spent with general education peers versus, our special education classroom. And this is not the last page in that book. And there's so much progress being made every single day. And that's why we meet every year. We review and we, as a team, determine the best placement for the child and for the student. It's not one person's decision. It's not set in stone. And it could be the middle of the year and not even time for a meeting. And a parent can call that meeting and say, we need to address this. We need to determine, is this still the appropriate setting? Is this still the least restrictive environment? And sometimes it's not. And then we can make a change.
Right. Yeah, I've always said I wanted Emma to go up as her education. If this is her starting point, I want to let's keep pushing her to the next level and pushing her to the next level.
Right.
And we have been able to successfully do that. And for us, Emma started in that CBI class, and now she's in special class with you and being successful.
Absolutely.
But when she first started, she needed that extra support, and that was okay. But again, like I said, she wasn't in there all day. She was
Right.
out to general ed for reading, and so again, like you say, let's it's not the final, just like
Not.
kindergarten or first grade. You got a
Yes.
long ways to go.
Yes. And we have to
Many,
remember that
many more days of
many. Yes.
education.
And I think about that, especially with our children that are maybe they're placing in kindergarten. Maybe it's something that wasn't identified until they were school age. They might not have been to preschool, or it wasn't something that we really could identify until they were in kindergarten. And if they haven't been in school, if they haven't had all these opportunities, they are still little people trying to figure out a really big world. And we have to, there's so much grace that has to be given with that, because there's so much to learn. A lot of kids haven't been made to line up or sit quietly or check out a book, things that are difficult and procedures that we have to learn and teach step by step. So really understanding when a student comes into my class, figuring out who they are, their background, what their experiences are, what motivates them, and what is going to help them be successful. And that's just such an important piece of collaborating with families, families to me, and then me being that voice to go advocate for them to the rest of the school building and for their other teachers.
So once the placement has been determined by the team, and team, I'm meaning the parents.
Yes.
The parents, we need to make sure that the parents have a voice at the table, and
Absolutely.
they need to, and I really want them to understand that they are part of that team, and hopefully that their team recognizes that they are a part of that team and a very important part of that team. So once everyone is agreeing with placement, what is the next step?
So after the placement's been determined, the IEP, individualized education plan, will be made. And so that's going to go through it. It's typically 12 to 18 page document, again, every year, that you're going to review and revise as needed. It's going to have a list of present levels, and this will have strengths and needs, It might include, if your child gets related services, it might have the speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy. It'll have those needs in there, as well as social needs in the general education classrooms. That could include preferential seating or paraprofessional support. And then those strengths, those things that are done really well. And then after all that's put together by the special education teacher, they'll develop goals to meet that student's needs. Those goals are for a year. So if a student was placing in October, a new IEP would be developed the next October. So it is for a whole year. And that's when that plan's made, and then the child, it begins receiving those services. But we take evaluation data from psych evaluations, from the speech therapist, oftentimes from teacher and parent surveys that they fill out to give us information. And all that's really combined to make a plan, an individual plan for the student's learning for the next year.
So you touched a little bit on OT, PT, and speech, and I know that those are additional services. And so it's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that those services must be provided in the school system, correct? The school district must provide the students with those services, correct?
Yes. So we have to make education accessible to the students. So access is that big word. So when we think about buildings having to have a wheelchair ramp for someone to be able to enter the building using their wheelchair, we have to make the curriculum, the learning available to students. And if there's evaluations determined that a student needs speech therapy, the occupational, the physical therapy, then the school district provides it. And testing for those things is also provided by the school district. Again, you can bring in outside evaluations if they've been done, but the school district will provide those. And then they are provided as part of their school day. They come into the classroom sometimes. There's those push-in opportunities if that's a more meaningful experience, or they'll do pull-out therapy sessions in a therapy room. But a lot of times these therapists, we work so closely with them, and they're a part of that team. When we talk about the team decision, they work really closely with the teachers to help determine how can we best support this student. And if it's easier to come into the classroom, if there's a good relationship there and that child can get a meaningful experience in the classroom, then that's where they're going to be best served. On top of that, transportation to and from school can be provided. Again, those are buses that have access for wheelchairs. Sometimes they'll have a harness if a child needs a harness to be safe, or just a seatbelt. Those are written into the IEP. And those are things that the parents and the team need to decide. What is the safest way for the child to get to and from school? That also can include social work, mental health services that can come into the school as well. So really looking at the whole child, what does the whole child need to be successful in that setting, and how are we going to provide it for them?
Yeah, and we talk a lot about inclusion. It is the most important piece of the equation, in my opinion. But what I really want to talk about, and you're so good at talking about this, and this is why I wanted to bring this up, and this is something that I've even had to learn over the past 4 years, is what exactly is meaningful inclusion?
Absolutely. This is something I'm so passionate about, and I really, I've been doing a lot of research on it, and our district has talked a lot recently in the special education department about like high leverage practices for inclusion, for meaningful inclusion, what that looks like and how we're going to provide that. Because federal law states that students need to be included to the maximum extent possible with their typically developed, their non-disabled peers. That's where they need to be as much as possible. But we know that me walking a student into a classroom and sitting them down isn't inclusion. That's not providing them with a real opportunity to be a part of a community. So we have to work together. This is where a school culture comes into play, top down, for what we expect from our staff and what we expect from our district, of meaningful opportunities for students to be included. So that means they have a seat in the classroom, they have a desk, they have materials in the classroom. So when they come in, they're not a guest that's entering just to visit. They're a member of that environment. They're a member of that community, and they are not allowed opportunities to be involved, but they're expected to be involved, and they're wanted to be included and be involved. Um, and that's hard. It is really hard to do, and COVID's made that even harder. The mask wearing, the social distancing, the desk spacing. It's made it for a harder year for that. But there's always opportunities for that. That means that at lunch, that my class shouldn't all be sitting side by side together. That means they should be spread out. They should be sitting next to a peer that maybe has an easier time communicating and starting conversations, and really encourages them to have a deeper relationship. That means that in class, they might have a peer tutor, someone to support them getting access to their computer or getting the materials out. There's always a friend that you can find to pair a student with that is going to make them have a really good, safe, and enjoyable environment. I think that we can say we're doing inclusion. We can say that, your student's always welcome to come in, but it's not my student. It's our student. We're sharing this student. And the more that those relationships can be cultivated, and the more that students from my class or any of the other special class CBI settings can really feel a part of something bigger than the walls of my classroom, it's going to make them want to learn. It's going to make them want to be a part of that and want to go out and really, sitting and listening to a lesson. They might not be able to do all the work, but they're watching their peers model appropriate behaviors, right? Like they're seeing someone excited to see them walk into the classroom. They're feeling safe and they're feeling confident, which is going to just give them so much more energy and excitement to learn more and to try new things. And that's just so important. I can't teach that just in my classroom. I have to depend on the general education teachers to help provide my students with those opportunities.
And it's interesting when you talk about the meaningful inclusion. I remember we had a team meeting at one point, and one of Emma's behavioral therapists was talking about her. She was in the library with all of her gen ed classes, and they were sitting around, and she was at a table with them, and they were all talking, like little girls do, chit chatting, and Emma was coloring. And, she pointed out that that's not necessarily meaningful inclusion.
Right.
And as her mother, I didn't recognize that. I thought, well, she's at the table with them. She's hanging out with them. She's playing with them. And she said, well, no, not really, because she's not talking with them. She's
right
here. She's not addressing them, and she's not doing what they're doing. And that's what it looks like.
Absolutely.
For her to pick up on, oh, they're talking, and it's okay for me to talk to them. And for someone to encourage her to, do you see that your friends are talking? You want to talk with your friends? It's like you say, she was just a guest at the table at that moment in time. That's all she was a guest at the table. It wasn't true inclusion.
Exactly. And I think that's so, I really try to make time in every single day for meaningful, real, just naturally occurring opportunities in the classroom for us to learn those skills, to experience those things, and so that they can be maintained. They can be lasting behaviors that we're doing in a small, controlled environment. But then changing the environment in my class and then not being able to take it into other settings kind of makes it meaningless. Like, great, so you can do that here, but what does that mean big picture? Not much, so if we can go into the general education classroom, if we can go into art or PE and even lunch, and that we've had, Emma and another student and I will eat lunch at my table or sit down and share a snack and talk. So now the three of us have had a conversation back, three people going back and forth, which is hard sometimes. It's a lot of energy going on and hard to balance that. But okay, now three people here talk. So now we can go in the library and we can all sit and talk, and we can add to those conversations, and we can be a part of something bigger and better. And I think that's so important. There's so much value in, we sit down and we play board games. Every Friday we have a class community lunch. We take turns doing these things that are hard in life just to get practice doing, but they're so valuable, because if we're learning it here and we can make it meaningful, then we can take it out there and make it even bigger and better. And that's the ultimate goal.
So let me ask you, might be a little tough question, but I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. And this wasn't something that we prepared, but if you were a parent and you were walking into these classrooms and you were meeting these teachers, what are some of the things that you would be looking for? What are some of the questions that you might ask?
It's hard. I think, it's really hard not to go in. I don't want to say prepared for a fight seems really strong, but you're there to advocate for your child. At the end of the day, you're going to do whatever you have to do to make sure your child gets what they need, what they deserve, and what's best for them. And so it's hard to go in and think, this teacher's my friend. She's going to do exactly what my child needs, exactly what's best, because you don't know them. There's not a relationship there yet. But oftentimes in special education, we're working with students for multiple years. And so those relationships, I mean, they really form and they really do get deep, but there's got to be that starting point. So I would say, number one, get to know your child's teacher just like you want them to get to know your child. So find a way to connect with them in some way, whether that be, depending on what that teacher's comfortable sharing, emails or whatever they use to message. But ask them some of those tough questions. Just say, how are you going to provide those inclusion opportunities for my students? Or what's your opinion on inclusion? What's your opinion on least restrictive environment for my student? How do you see them receiving that? And if it's not enough or you have concerns about it, tell them that and see, give them an opportunity to fix it. Special education is it's a hard career field, and a lot of times you do have teachers kind of burning out early, and so there can be turnover. So you might be getting some new teachers in that profession. So give them the same grace that you would want them to give your child, but really work on forming that relationship and just that open communication. Provide them with as much information about your child as possible. Let them know what drives your child. It may be a special toy. It could be food. I mean, really, if something works, let's do it. Let's give, if it's not going to cause a problem or distraction in the classroom for everyone else, why can't we try that?
And that may change. That may change week to week.
Absolutely. And it's so funny what drives, some student food, marshmallows might be a good encouragement. Another student might just want to sit next to you or spend a little time with you. And so there's so many things you can give them. The child has a voice. If they're nonverbal, they have a voice. They have a preference. They can share with you what they want or need. And we've just got to find those things out. But I would say just that open communication with your child's teacher and just trying to figure out how you can support each other, because it is going to be a need to be a supportive relationship. And figure out how they communicate best too. I know some people might prefer written information because that's how they process it. They may be more verbal learners. So you really have to figure out how to best communicate with them. And then I'd say, look in the classroom and see, that's a hard, especially with COVID, things, that's changed part of it. And then sometimes students' needs in the classroom might mean that some of those resources or those things have to be taken down, but see what the classroom looks like. Is it warm and inviting? I mean, we know students with special needs have different things in the classrooms that they need. The lights might need to be covered. There might need to be soft surfaces. Is it fun? Is it an inviting, safe environment? Because kids need to come to school and feel safe, and they need to come to school to be loved. We're not going to get the big academic skills if they're not loved and safe, and that's for every kid. So
that's for all children. That's for all. That's for me.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not going to be effective. So and let's touch on this too. Is one thing that when we are talking about IEP and we are talking about getting the plan in place, one thing that I didn't think about, but another parent actually pointed out to me was, look at how many transitions your kid may have in a day. You have something to say about that?
Yes.
Or some ideas?
And that's something to even be considered with resource, that sometimes I have a student right now, and it was a really hard decision to determine placement for this student. Academically, some of their skills are a lot higher than the special class setting typically you would see, There's a lot more functional behavior needs though, and adding in constant transitions to resource, back to gen ed, to activity, back to gen ed, it would have made for a mess. So for right now, self-contained is the best setting to meet that child's needs because we cannot add in 8 different back and forths every day. It is going to be too much. So there's a lot of tools we can use with that. Visual schedules. Some students really benefit from a really broken down day, seeing each little part. A lot of students that can be really overwhelming for. So we can do a first then next schedule, just some visual cues and reminders of, hey, this is what's next on their desk, sitting there so they know it's coming up. The timer that you got us for our classroom, it gets used probably more than any other resource in our classroom. And I can do a minute to an hour. I have a student that gets really hungry and wants to know when lunch is, starts asking constantly about an hour out. I can set that timer. You can see, okay, it's getting down, it's getting less. It can be used so many different ways because those transitions can be stressful and overwhelming. So kind of we have to have an environment that supports the child's needs, but it has to be a little bit predictable for most kids in order for them to be successful and kind of take that stressful piece out of it.
Well, Jessica, I could sit and talk to you, all day long. You're such a breath of fresh air when it comes to teaching our community. I wish that, there was one of you in every single school. But unfortunately there is not. Is there anything any words of encouragement maybe that you can give to teachers or to parents, or if they just don't feel like their kids' needs are being met? I
think going back to that communication between teachers and parents, and I know it is scary. It is scary to trust this child who really maybe can't tell you about their day. They can't tell you what scared them that day, why they had a behavior that day, what went wrong, what was great. You can't get that full story. And that is scary and it's overwhelming. And I think a lot of times like I said earlier, we kind of go in like, okay, I've got to fight for this. I've got to get what's right for my kid. But we've really got to work together. And there is so much great that can be done when we're working. And we're an IEP team. So we have to work together as a team. We have to listen, and we have to truly listen to what everybody at that table is saying, because you're going to know something about your child that I've never seen or never experienced because I haven't lived with them that long. But I'm going to see things with your kiddo that because I'm getting 6 to 8 hours a day with them in a completely different setting. And by taking all that information together, we truly can work as a team to win for students. My life is just, it's so blessed by the students in my class. And I say that my mom and I talk about it all the time because I'll say, oh my gosh, this funny story, or I've gotten phone calls from students when I've been with them, FaceTimes from families, different things. It is such a blessing to my family. My own children are better humans because they are friends with the students in my classroom. And that's something that I couldn't have taught them otherwise.
Right.
So I just encourage teachers. I know special education is intimidating. It's intimidating for general education teachers. Most of them, unless they're in really new programs, got exceptional child in the regular classroom as one college course through their undergraduate degree. They got a class that taught them how to teach gifted to students with special needs, and that's not enough. And they're not specialists in that area. So it's hard to expect them to be when they don't have those resources. But special ed, it's my heart. I can't imagine teaching anywhere else. I don't want to teach anywhere else. I know it's where I'm meant to be. So I look to veteran special education teachers, and I encourage you to just mentor teachers coming through, encourage them, because it is overwhelming and it is scary. But also mentor and encourage your general education teachers. They oftentimes want and need to know more. They're maybe intimidated to ask, don't want to admit that they need to ask, or no one's ever told them they truly don't know. So I just keep collaborating and communicating and working. We know why we went into teaching. Our job is to do what's right for kids every day, all day. But that's going to take teamwork across the board.
And I think that, I hear you keep saying grace, 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 and you are exactly right. I think that everybody is there to try to make the world a better place and to educate our children. And the parents have to have grace with the teachers, and the teachers have to have grace with the parents, and then everybody has to have grace with the child. And at no point should our children be scared to go to school. And if our kids are ever scared to go to school, then we need to come together at the table and try to figure out this isn't healthy. So let's try to figure out what's going on. But again, grace. Everybody has to have grace to get through it.
We do, absolutely, with ourselves, and with everyone involved. And you're right. I tell the kids every day. When I taught pre-K before, we did some conscious discipline training, and part of that was telling the kids and reminding the students that my number one job is to keep you safe. And I tell them, it's your job is to help me keep it safe. And so they have to know when they come into my class that they're going to be protected, and that I'm going to advocate for them, and I'm going to do everything possible to make them successful in all areas of life. But you're right, they have to feel safe, and parents need to know that their child's safe. So if they ever do have concerns about that, again, you're their biggest voice, and you're their only voice sometimes. So
and don't be afraid.
Right.
Don't be afraid to have those
Absolutely.
Conversations.
Because they're hard sometimes, and they are intimidating. We've had hard conversations before.
And I know you and I talk about this a lot, because what sometimes what parents see at home versus what they see at school are two different things. And my kid doesn't do this at home, and my kid doesn't do this at school. The settings are so different. And, just like when Emma goes to school, she's in a classroom with multiple kids, with multiple people. She may be hungry. There may be the lights or something. It's a completely different setting. And so everybody needs to understand that it might not necessarily be the teacher or the parent. It might just be that there's too much noise that day, or it's a completely different setting. Completely different setting. So many
times. We even talk about how Emma is such an entertainer. She loves to entertain her friends, and she loves that attention piece. And she is getting different reinforcements from that at school than she is at home.
Right.
And so there's so many factors that can affect all of that. So there are going to be different things that we see in those different settings. And that's normal. That's what we expect.
That's normal. I mean, that's kids. That's kids.
Yeah.
Well, again, I just can't thank you enough. I really can't. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you. I mean, I know that you fight for so many kids in the state, and you continue to do amazing things. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being one of the good guys, Jessica. We really, really appreciate that.
I so appreciate being here and trusting me with her, because I love her very much.
Well, I can't thank you enough. You have provided us with so much information. Do you have any resources maybe that you could maybe share with some, or books that you have perhaps read that you thought were good resources for you, maybe as a teacher or as a parent, that you have found that might be good resources for parents?
Absolutely. I was talking earlier, I recently finished the High Leverage Practices for Inclusion, and I can share that information with you. I don't know if you'll have a chat or something later, we can drop that in. That was an outstanding resource to me. Just so great as far as an educator, seeing different ways to meet students' needs, and it talks about so many different aspects of special education. There is so much out there right now, and so many different varying points of view. But I don't know, I really try to take it all in and really find those inclusion opportunities, and those books on that have been big resources for me lately. But I will definitely share that information.
If you would, please. You just share it with me, and we'll make sure that it's available for everybody. So again,
Absolutely.
thank you. And I look forward to talking to you more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Jessica.
Bye.